Hello, my name is Calvin Kingdon. I'm currently a senior match move supervisor at Track VFX. I've done projects like Stranger Things, Baywatch, X-Men Apocalypse, Rampage, etc. So in this video, we're going to be just doing a very basic camera solve on this shot. And by that, I mean we're going to go through some basic settings under the Solver tab and doing very basic distortion on the shot. We're going to jump over to the Lens tab, orient the scene using the perspective lines that are all visible in the shot. And then we're going to be building very basic geometry for the floor, the walls, the counter, the fridge, whatever we feel like building geo for, honestly. Okay, so with that, let's begin. And let's see, where do I want to start? Obviously, I guess, the Solver tab. So now that we're in the Solver area, just a quick overview of some of the buttons here and what we're going to be using. So we're going to stick to automatic solving. This isn't a tripod shot, we're not touching that. Refine we're probably going to touch a little bit later to smooth the path of our camera solve. Everything else here we're not going to be touching at all. We won't be touching this, but these are initial hints to help the solve. And if you ever have a solve that's not exactly working how you expect, you could try flip to one of these and it might give you a nicer result. Slow but sure looks when you start a solve, you start with 2 frames. You can see here there's a little green tick at the beginning and a red tick here. You can also adjust them by dragging these. Your solve starts with 2 frames, and sometimes it's not always great, so maybe you can check off slow but sure and it'll try a little bit harder to figure out that initial movement between those 2 frames. Honestly, I don't see it make the biggest difference all the time, but sometimes it works. Sometimes you can tell there's a difference. Constrain, this here will let you utilize any locks or constraints that you have floating around your scene. So maybe you have a model for this set and you select any of these points, and you can under the tracker tab, you can tell these trackers exactly where they need to sit, and then you can add different kinds of locks, whatever you please. So let's go back to the Solver tab, and the beginning and end frame, I kind of touched on this already. This is to adjust your 2 starting frames. World size, this, like it says, is the diameter of the world containing your camera and just your general scene. We don't normally need to touch this that often, honestly, so I'm gonna leave that for now. But sometimes I adjust this. Sometimes it helps me get a better solve if my scene is absolutely massive. Transition frames. This is when you solve a camera and these points start to go off screen, they kind of smooth their way off, and this is the option to tell it how strong that is. So this is a pretty advanced feature that we probably won't be touching. Overall weight. The object's weight during solving. Object's weight. Actually, it says object's weight. That's not what I was expecting it to say. I thought the overall weight was the overall weight of all these trackers, which I guess doesn't make sense. You know what? We're going to skip over this. Filtering control. This is where you have control over the smoothing for your camera or your object. So you can smooth the path, you can smooth the rotation, and you got field of view here for if you have a zooming shot and the zoom is a little jittery. Distance. This is the actual distance of your object, of your object to your camera. I think sometimes you might also want to use this on a camera. I think I've done it before, but this is mainly more useful for object solves. If you have a camera pushing, if you track someone's head and it's pushing back and forth, it's jittery in the Z depth of the camera. That's how you would fix it. Also, I'm going to say while I'm here, just in case I forget later, but whenever you smooth something, always reset this. So you do what you want, you hit smooth for your camera, and hey, things are smooth. You reset this all the time. Otherwise, every time you hit solve, it's going to keep applying the same smooth that you did, and it's not going to work how you think it will. We'll be touching on that later. Let's see. Axis locks. When you smooth or do any alterations to the path of your camera or object, this is where you're going to tell Syntheyes, hey, lock these and stick with it. So if I smooth the camera, I'm going to lock the position for the camera for the duration of the shot, and I'm going to load in the smooth path into here, and here you can also adjust the weighting, like how strong you stick to that smooth path. So you can have like Syntheyes try to solve its own path, which might be jittery, and you might have your own smooth version that you loaded in here. And you can tell it, hey, solve 50% close to my smooth path, but keep a little bit of jitter. That's kind of what this all is. This is all locks and waiting to tell it how hard that it should stick to what you want it to be. This is pretty confusing, but this is something we'll be getting at later. What do we got? Never convert to far. Sometimes if your trackers solve way off at a distance, Syntheyes thinks it's helping you out if it automatically converts some of these to a far tracker, meaning it's like in an infinite depth in the shot. Like let's say some mountains like a kilometer away, or the clouds, or maybe the moon. The moon is so far that any distance that you would move across a shot is insignificant and doesn't matter. Field of view, focal length, that's pretty self-explanatory. I don't think we need to touch that. Known, fixed, unknown, fixed with estimate and zooming. So if you know your focal length, obviously enter it in here. Always do it on the first frame because this will animate. And I have a lot of people who type in a focal length like right over here. So like, oh, it's 34. But then you scrub and you can see that number changes. So you have to go and delete the key. So I can hit this button or I could right click. I really like right clicking to delete things in Syntheyes. Fixed unknown, mostly you want to use this. It's pretty rare that we get data. It's nice to have a really good educated guess of what the focal length might be, but usually Syntheyes does a great job at solving its own focal length, and you're usually best to stick with that. Fixed with estimate. Fixed with estimate, this kind of does some stuff behind the scenes with seeding, and if you kind of have an idea of the lens, you can say, hey, it's around 30. This will kind of kick it off with something like that and build off of it, I think. No zoom and estimated field of view is set up. Check plate width. I don't know what that means. Zooming, if you have a zoom lens, again, pretty self-explanatory. This will adjust for when you zoom your lens. Identical weight, lens weight, I actually don't know what that is. We'll forget about it. Distortion, here, if I go over to the lens tab and we can see this grid, if I scrub ahead in the shot, you could see I have some distortion going on the top floor here with these wooden beams. So if I drag, also distortion, it's under the lens tab too. If I drag this, you could see that we are actually applying distortion to our solve, which I know our solve doesn't really exist, but if I draw a line, actually wasn't too far off. Let's see, using lines you can also manually get your distortion if you feel that confident in your ability to do so. I do not generally. I like what the software solves for us. It's not always correct though, and it's pretty hard to judge whether or not it is correct or not. I'm going to undo all this, get rid of that line, and undo that distortion. Let's go back to solver. Calculate distortion, lens workflow. At the very end, if you have distortion in the shot, at the very end of all these steps, you're going to be applying the distortion, and then with redistorted, and you're going to get some black bars, and your plate's going to adjust its resolution. You'll see me do this at the very end. Add line. This is the stuff that is under lens. You know what's funny? I actually didn't know this was here. Shows how much attention I pay. It really pays just to sit and look at things, you know? Smell the roses. Okay, last but not least is 3D tab. I'm just going to brush over this quickly. So here, if I hit F4 on my keyboard, it takes me to this quad view. And here, so let's select any piece of geometry, doesn't matter. Let's go plane. So now the wand is on, I can click and drag and I can add geometry into our scene. So I'm going to undo these. The plane was pretty basic. If I go cone, you could see when I click and drag, it has this initial little cone, but then I let go. Lets me get the radius and scale, or just the scale I guess in general. And now I click and it lets me do the height. So that's generally how all of the geometry in here works. Like box, I click, drag, let go, and it scales up. Pretty straightforward. You can import your own geometry if you come down to import and then click the wand and you'll get stuff. Let's see. So once you've made any kind of object, I'll make a box. Here you have your move, rotate, scale. You can click these if you want, but it's kind of nice to just hit W, E, and R on your keyboard. It's just like Maya and Houdini. I don't know if any other software does this, but it's pretty handy just to use these hotkeys. Let's see. I'm going to zero this out. So if I go up to here, again, right-clicking usually clears things in Syntheyes. So I can clear out all that, go to rotations, clear that, scale. I think if I clear that, it makes it 0. So if I clear all these, it's going to just make it a non-existent little tiny red dot. Believe it or not, there's a little red dot in there. It's pretty awesome. Okay, let's see. This is just visibility stuff. We'll come to this eventually later. Hole is an important button. Hole lets us move your entire scene. And you'll see when we have our solve, we're going to have some green points that are going to follow this around. Let's see. Okay, well, so I've kind of explained things roughly and probably very poorly. So now let's actually do it, so hopefully it sinks in a little bit better, because I explain things fast and very sloppily. I'm not very good at making tutorials yet, and hopefully that changes soon. So I'm under Solver. A quick tip while I'm here. When you move through any of these rooms, you'll notice it changes your view, like what you're doing. And sometimes maybe you don't want that. Maybe you just like your main view. Like if I hit F2, it gives me my main tracker view. The view that you would get if you hit trackers. And I like this view a lot. I like viewing the wireframes and the track and 3D points in this view. But if you click Solver, the word, you'll notice it gives you this, and maybe you don't feel like seeing this, so you hit F2 and that gets annoying. But if you click on the icons for any of these, it changes, it puts you in the room still, but it keeps your view as what it was. So that's a pretty handy thing that you probably want to remember. It's surprisingly frustrating when you keep clicking these and you keep changing it back to whatever it is you want. So yeah, just a quick tip. And let's get into solving this. Alright, so let's run down the chain of command. So I'm going to hit the big green button. Also the hotkey Shift G, I'm just going to hit Shift G. So I've got a solve, and here you have some data. Sometimes this gives you some useful information to help you troubleshoot. I'm not going to look at this now, so I'm going to hit OK. Also, sorry, these red rings wouldn't normally appear for you. So I'm going to right click, go to view, and just turn these off at show tracker radar. Okay, so looking at this, if I hit F4, I can see a view of everything. So you can see these points vaguely representing the room. And here you can see we have our magical camera solve, and we're having a good time now. Things like this is exciting. I spent a long time just going over these settings. Maybe was I slow? I don't know. Sorry, I get distracted easily. So this solve, right off the bat, it looks pretty awesome. To the untempered eye, it might look like a good solve, but this is actually a pretty bad solve, like because we have distortion. We didn't solve for distortion. If we take a look at some points over here, you can see that the yellow point, which is the actual 3D scene, the actual 3D, like Maya would call it locators, Blender calls them empties, whatever you want to call them. These 3D points, these yellow points is the actual what the 3D objects that you're going to put in is doing. So if you put some CG somewhere in this corner, or if you put some CG down on this cushion, maybe you have a little animated character sitting on this cushion, he's going to be sliding around and he's not going to be very well integrated. So to fix this, actually while we're here, let's talk about error, solve error. This number right here, this error number, 1.06 blah blah blah, this is the average slide of all the trackers in your scene. And I believe that's by pixels. I can't remember what HPIX stands for. But I believe that's a pixel. If we look at all these trackers, like right here, you can kind of see this yellow is kind of sliding the distance of a pixel. Over here, kind of same here. Everything in the scene over here, this looks like it's sliding like maybe 2 pixels. Is that if I hover over this, we got 1.5. Yeah, it's kind of like 1.5. Little pixel here. That's kind of like 2 pixels. Whatever. I don't know. I could be wrong on that. Anyway, this number, you want this to be as low as possible. Anything higher than 1 is typically not the best solve. Like, honestly, it's if you're just doing like a YouTube video or maybe a little project for your demo reel, this is actually a pretty decent solve. So long as your CG maybe hovers in the middle of your shot, honestly. But around the edges, everything's sliding. So this error is going to drop when I solve calculate distortion, because since we're getting rid of the bend in the shot, our points are going to be able to sit more accurately within the tracker. Also, if you're wondering why distortion needs to be corrected, if you think about a video game or if you've ever navigated some 3D software, computers in a digital world, things are always like perfect straight lines. The curvature that we see in this is the lens, like the glass of your camera. And it's not, some lenses don't have distortion. I think that's called rectilinear. I could be wrong. But this lens, I have a spherical lens and it's got distortion and we need to correct that bend. So let's do that now. I'm going to turn on calculate distortion, hit go, and hitting OK. So if you saw our points there, I'm going to Control Z so I can undo and redo with Y. Control Z, Control Y. You can see what all our points are doing. Our points have all changed position because even the back wall here the back wall, the far door over here is actually looking flatter too. That looks more natural. So yeah, solving for distortion has helped us significantly improve the solve that we have. So if we look, before we had an error of 1 pixel slide, but when we look at the good solve, we've cut that down by half. This is fantastic. Looking around the scene, a nice way to check error media. Well, first, if I stabilize on a couple of these, by the way, if you want to stabilize on points, you can lock into a tracker by hitting 5 on your keyboard. So these points are sticking pretty well. Let's see. Let's look at the counter. Nice. Maybe check out the back here, see what the points are all doing. This looks pretty awesome. Okay, so we've got a solve and the camera is doing some nice things. And what do we want to do now? So we did a little bit of distortion. You could see the distortion value here, negative 0.02. If I go to the lens tab, you can see our lens grid. This is how much our footage is distorting. Later on, when I actually apply the distortion to the shot, you'll see the black bars are going to be like, it's going to look crazy. Back to solver. So, I also had zooming on. Ooh, what's that? I don't know what that is. I didn't even know that was a thing that could pop up. That weird ghost A button. I left zooming on by accident. And I didn't zoom the shot. I know I didn't. So we're going to change this to fix unknown. Hit go. And yeah, things are still looking awesome. Our camera is doing a nice clean move. Okay, so let's see. Right now, it'd be worth it to smooth our camera since I'm very comfortable with what the... Actually, let's not smooth the camera. It's nice to save the refinement of your camera maybe until after you've kind of proved your solve's worth. So I kind of want to build some I kind of want to orient this scene, build some geometry, and see what the solve is doing. And then once I'm comfortable and happy with what the result is, then I'll refine and do final smoothing and call it a day. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to orient the scene now. Because if I tried to build in any geometry, if I jump over to the 3D tab, build maybe a box I'll drop in, click and drag to kind of encompass these points. I can't see, I should have zoomed out. Oh, my camera's also very low. I'm going to move that up a bit. So in 3D, I'm going to change to the move tool, hit hole, and now if I click and drag, you can see it moves everything, all the points, but it also moves the geometry I just placed. I don't want the geometry to move, I just want to move the camera and the points. So I'm going to right click, go 3D, hole effects mesh is off, and now moving this up, so things are kind of looking crazy over here. because we are very close to that geo's face. So I'm going to hit the slash button under the backspace key on my keyboard, and I don't see the other side of the geometry. So off to the side where I mentioned that we have kind of some display stuff for the mesh, I'm going to turn off hole so I can select the mesh. Here we have cast shadows, cast shadows, cat shadows, back faces, or invert normals. So actually I'm going to invert normals because I don't need to see the wall in front. Okay, so F2 so I can get my bigger view. So here you could see the perspective lines of this box are not lined up with the lines of my kitchen. And this would make it a challenge for us to place geo, because we don't want to place geo and keep rotating it meticulously in every direction trying to get things to line up. We want to orient the scene so that every geo we put in here will just slide nicely into place easily. So I'm going to delete this box for now. So let's start it. So I'm going to go to Lens. Actually, let's stick under Solver because I noticed the buttons are here too. Still, if you look under Lens, you have your line. Actually, let's just stay here. Why not? So right away, I'm going to get rid of this lens grid because it's just kind of in the way doing nothing. So right click, view, and show lens grid off. And we're going to find a frame that shows us some really nice clear axes lines. So let's pick a frame. Sure, let's pick a frame like this. So here I could see I got some nice Z line right here, some right here with the whatever, and I've got a nice X line on the counter and on the cupboards. And when I say that, if you look in 3D and with any software, you have your axes right here. Your Z is generally pointed towards you, I guess. Whatever, however your scene is oriented. You got your Z going here, positive X going there, and your Y is going up in the scene. So I'm going to imagine that the Z here is this wall right here, and my X going this way is my cupboards and counter, so this stuff. Just so my camera kind of generally stays in this area. I could draw a line and tell my Z to be pointing this way and my X to be pointing this way, but it doesn't matter. You can do what you want, really. Alright, let's start laying down some lines now. Hopefully that description made sense. So I'm going to click add line, and let's place a Z line first. So I'm going to click here, drag outwards, and let go. So we want to have two main axes lines, not all three. For some reason, Syntheyes, if you use all three, like if you put a Z, an X, and a Y, it's going to say something mutually incompatible lines. It only wants two of these. So pick your favorites. In this shot, I see a nice Z line here, a Z line here, Z line here, and I have a good Y line here and a Y line there. I could use that, but just for no reason, I'm going to lay down some X lines because I like my counter, the cupboard, and I like the top floor up here, the wooden beam or whatever this is. Alright, so we got one Z down, and let's get some parallel lines for the Z so that Syntheyes knows what the other Z lines are doing. Do not make another on Z line. Only lay down parallel lines. So here, parallel to Z. Sure, let's get a parallel Z over here. And okay, we got 4. The more lines you add, the better. The more lines that you add, it's going to average it out and make it nice and clean, because these lines are all pointing at a vanishing point way over here in the distance. This is going to set your horizon line level. Let's see, let's add another line. Let's go with our X line. I'm going to place the X here. On X, also just kind of zoom in, make sure that your lines are nice and perfectly aligned. Oh, I accidentally clicked somewhere else. Not oriented, and I'm going to Control Z so I undo that dot. And here we go. Just kind of zoom in and make sure that you're comfortable with where your point is sitting. You also notice that these lines are bent with the distortion that Syntheyes solved for us. So that's a nice thing that's done for us. If we don't like the distortion, like if I zoom in and I see something like this, I actually think some of the beams in my apartment are warped. So I don't think I'm going to do this manually, but if I did, I can look at this line, see, oh, it's off slightly, and I can go and drag this value. And yeah, just to kind of refine it in more. I'm going to undo. It might, like, I don't know, this could be straight. I honestly think it's warped. A lot of things in my kitchen are warped. Like, look at the ceiling back here, uneven. The countertop, I actually know the countertop is uneven. And my floors are incredibly uneven. I got a very janky place. I should move. Okay. Let's see. More X lines. Let's get this janky, uneven cupboard. Parallel to X. This side of my counter is very lopsided. You can see the crack in there. That was not me, I swear. But this side of the counter is pretty alright. Parallel to X. And you know what, I'll put one up top here too. Parallel to X. Again, just kind of zoom in, make sure everything is adjusted nicely. Cool. Okay, so if I'm gonna go into sorry, I'm gonna go into F3. Oh man, let me just die in the middle of this recording. So when I hit F3, it brought me into the perspective view. So here I'm in 3D. Immediately I want to lock to my camera and look through it. So I can hit this lock button here or hit L on my keyboard. So now I'm going to right click and you'll see a box highlights around. So now that I've right clicked, I'm automatically in Pan 2D mode. And so it treats your 3D view just like the 2D camera view. Alright, so also a nice thing about being in 3D is that it puts your image on a mesh and distorts it so you could see your distortion, which is pretty handy. And yeah. So now when I scrub, here we can see that things are very misaligned and the horizon line is too low and everything just looks like hot garbage here. So we're still under the lens room. So here, when I hit align, we're going to see everything's going to snap into place. Also, a quick thing in case some people wonder, the origin for this grid, everything's going to move way up here because that's where these two main lines intersect. Wherever your two main lines intersect is where it's going to want to put the origin. So let's hit align. And there you go, as predicted, it's up there. But look at them perspective lines and the horizon line. Everything looks fantastic. So now that that is done, let's do a quick scrub. It looks absolutely amazing. Okay, let's move this down a bit. So I'm going to hit F4, and also let's go over to our 3D room. Here you can see our nice aligned point cloud. Let's kind of move this up to the center of the world. Also, what we want to do is we want to scale the scene up. It's always nice to scale things before you start doing anything else, because if you start building geometry and all that stuff and then scale later, it's kind of annoying. So let's move this and scale this. And to scale it, you need something to reference. Like maybe you have some measurements of your scene. I don't, and I don't feel like doing it. So, and also we don't really often get measurements in the industry, really. We just kind of make 6-foot people and line them up. So I'm gonna just drag in an earthling geometry, and let's go to scale. The scale that we work with usually is a very big scale for what most software reads, but whatever. You can work with whatever scale you want. If you have a 6-foot dude or you know the scale that you want to work with, just go with whatever you want. You don't need to do what I do. I'm going to type in 180. I can't remember what units this is, but it doesn't really matter. All I know is this scale is too big for Maya. If you were to do simulations and stuff in Maya, Like this is massive. It'll make your simulations very weird and stupid. Okay, so let's move and start to scale things. We can see our dude is very big. So I'm gonna go move and click hole so that you can move your scene. And just remember, if your geo happens to move, like if it moves to the whole scene, that's how you fix it. You right click, 3D, hole effects meshes. Okay, let's move this up. We can see some points here that are very clearly the floor of my kitchen. So I'm gonna drag these down here. And now if we look over here in this view, I can scale these windows up. There, you can see he's sticking, but he's gigantic. He is massive. I am a very tall dude. I have nothing on this earthling. So over here, we can click on the scale tool. And I could click anywhere and scale the scene, but let's click and drag on a point on the floor so that we scale from the floor. And getting this dude, I don't know, maybe about the size of my fridge. This looks fine. So F2 so I can get my big view. So this looks pretty reasonable. He's kind of at a reasonable height. So let's call this scaled and oriented. Actually, let's just center things up so I can get my far walls over here at my scene kind of centered up roughly. Doesn't need to be perfect. Oh my god, doesn't need to be perfect. Cool. And he's on the ground, which is nice. Alright, let's turn hole off. I'm gonna delete my dude. I don't need him anymore. He's just kind of dead weight at this point. Don't worry, he does not have feelings to be hurt. Okay, so now what have we done? We have solved the camera. Oh, I have a lock on. Why do I have the lock on? I'm gonna click this. I don't think that affected anything, which is good. But wait, was that because I was gonna smooth things a while ago? Did I get carried away and not smooth things? Okay, well, new plan. We're gonna smooth afterwards. It doesn't matter, honestly. You can smooth before or after. So let's start building out some geo. So building out geo, first we want to color some of these points so we know exactly what things are what in the camera. So here, let's go over to the tracker room, and I'm gonna highlight some points and color them and group them. So let's say the fridge. I'm gonna select all the points in the front of the fridge, and let's color that. Let's go orange. Why not? So orange fridge, and I can play. Let's get the points on the countertop. Here. And let's color those. Let's go a light blue. Let's see, the ceiling, which I guess would be these lights. Oh, just in case somebody calls me out, if somebody knows better, don't track lights like this. I might talk about this in a video. Don't track like the curvature of a cylinder or a circle or a sphere, because you're not tracking a real point. It's a fake point. When you move your camera around, the edge of the sphere is always the edge of any part of this circle. So these trackers are technically sliding, but it's not that bad. So the roof here, let's go yellow. And let's get the far walls. This one's slightly off the wall, but whatever. Got a point here, here on this wall. Magenta? Sure, why not? Okay, so now in our quad view we can clearly make out what is what in these views. So let's start laying down some geometry. So building this out, let's start with the floor and the ceiling here. So let's get to plane. So we'll get a plane. And here, let's start dragging this plane in from the back door and the wall. Scale it out, try to fit it between the two walls here. You can see I'm slightly off, so I'm gonna take this, and it looks like I can scale this plane a bit. So it scales this out there, scales this over there. Yeah, let's scale it. So I'm gonna click here, and this number here, this is a uniform scale, so I'm gonna click and drag this. By the way, if your scale moves too fast and it's too like jolty, hold Control on your keyboard, and now you have a much more refined move. If you want to speed it up, hold Shift. Holding Control and Shift to speed up any spinner in Syntheyes is pretty handy. Okay, so let's call this good enough. Maybe I'll move this all up a bit now, because I scaled it up. This back wall doesn't fit. There we go, kind of averaged. So now let's take a look here. This looks pretty awesome. The floor looks like it's sticking. I didn't even color the floor points. I could do that really fast. And oop, forgot one. Let's color it. Let's go white. Again, the colors of these don't matter. Just color them whatever you want. Oh yeah, you can kind of see my uneven floor as well. My floor is very uneven. It's embarrassing, honestly. Everything, there's so many dips, and yeah. Also my counter. You'll notice there's a point of my counter I didn't select actually, because this is where there's a big dip in my counter on this side. So I'm going to color this one. I do want to see the edge of my counter, but I'm not going to color it blue. Let's go red. I like to color things red if it's some kind of point I don't trust, honestly. There we go, we can see that edge. Okay, we got the floor. I'm also going to reduce the subdivisions of this geo, and I can do that by clicking the number sign and drag these around. Let's go. I usually like to adjust my subdivisions so that we got uniform quads. I like to be able to know the perspective by looking at a quad, because you know what a square looks like. You know what the shape of a square is. Sometimes it helps you be able to tell if something is wrong with your scene, but you won't really understand that until you get a very tough shot yourself that you're going to want to know what the perspective is like. You'll just come across that one day. Okay, so we got the floor. Now let's take the same plane up here. I don't really want to go through making this plane again. So I'm going to go up to Script, and we're going to duplicate Mesh. This scripts here, this is just a lot of very handy, cool little tools that honestly you just got to play around with and see what it all does. You can type in these names in the manual of Syntheyes and Control F and search and find descriptions for everything. In fact, that's a good way to learn Syntheyes in general. If you find a button somewhere and like, oh, what does this stuff do? Type in this stuff in the manual search box, and you've got a description for everything. Okay, so let's duplicate this mesh. Script, duplicate. Oh, I said that funny. Why did I do that? Alright, and let's go move. So I can drag this up, but you notice I'm dragging it side to side. I don't want to do that. It's not very perfect. Also, notice how it snapped back for me. It's doing that because I right-clicked. If you're doing anything in Syntheyes, like maybe you scrub the bar, if you right-click, it'll reset. Same with geometry. Right-click, it'll reset. And I think that happens with all this stuff too. Right-click. Yeah. Right-click is kind of like an undo. So maybe you want to, oh, I want to look at this frame, but now I want to jump back to that same frame. What was it? Right-click. That's very handy to know. It saved me on more times than once. Okay, so let's move this plane up. Rather than move it up by hand like that, I'm going to go over here and drag it up perfectly. And we're going to drag it up to those yellow markers that were there. And again, holding Control gives you a much finer move. Looks like one of my lights is kind of low. That's a shame. Let's see if we have a point right on the edge of this corner or whatever, which we do. We have this one. So I'm gonna color it so I can tell what's going on. Sorry, I should color it under the tracker room. I don't know. Let's go green. A bright green. Is that even visible? It's not that visible. We can go magenta again. Whatever. I know that's not a wall, but who cares? So I trust this point more than I trust the lights. And again, my place is very warped surfaces. You might have a better result than me. So here, now we see the geometry lines up really nicely. And wow, I got pretty lucky with the subdivision level too, because the subdivisions and the squares, like it lines up at the back wall and it gets to the, it's just so close to the edge here. So I'm actually just going to drag this ahead so I get the edge to line up. And honestly, you're not building geo in Syntheyes, so you're good just leaving this how it is. But just in case you wanted to know how to get rid of these faces, if you go to F3, so you're in 3D, also you can see that my image plane is in front of the geometry. To fix that, I'm going to go to Solver. Here's the world size I mentioned earlier. I'm going to scale that up. And you can see that my scene in general gets larger, so I'm seeing my locators and everything and the geometry. Also, I don't really like that it's solid mesh. I'm gonna hit the slash button under the backspace key. There we go. And maybe I don't want to see this grid plane because I have my geometry, so I'm gonna hit G to hide the ground plane. Okay, so the geometry, delete these faces. You got to, if you have the toolbars thing here, click mesh, and here you have options for altering the geometry. If you don't have this, you can right click and you have toolbars and you can find everything here. So let's just click mesh. Okay, getting rid of the faces. For some reason it's called lightsaber deletion. So here now I can drag and highlight all the faces I don't want. And there's some faces tucked way up here. To orbit around the scene, I can hit orbit right here. And now also I have Maya style on, so this might not be the hotkeys for you, but I hit Alt and I can left click drag, click and drag, middle mouse, pan. It's just like Maya. But for me, if you don't have Maya style enabled, you can go to edit preferences, jump over to perspective, and here the first option is enable Maya, Maya style navigation in perspective. Okay, so now I can navigate here, and I'm just going to click lightsaber deletion again and highlight the rest of that geometry. Nice, it is gone. And let's hit F2 so I can go and take a look at things. And nice, we got some geometry that doesn't go past the edge. It looks pretty awesome. It's pretty clean. Okay, let's build out a wall and so we're going to quickly do the walls, the counter, and the fridge. So let's do that really fast now that you kind of have an idea of how things work. So I'm going to go 3D. So I got plane, click the wand so I can create. And now from a side view, I will click a plane in. Again, you don't have to be super perfect here because you're not going to build your geo in Syntheyes. Syntheyes is not meant for that. But this is a nice way to check if there's any errors going on, just placing some quick geo in the scene. And if you do a good enough job, maybe you want to take this geo into Maya or, again, whatever software you use. I'd imagine most people watching this are probably using Blender. Blender's awesome. I gotta get more into it. Okay, let's move this on over. Slide it to match this wall. And now we want to... Oh, that plane's not big enough. So let's go scale, and I'll... Oh, was that Z? Nope, that's wrong. This one? Nope. Also, if scaling is happening very slow for you, again, hold shift so it scales fast. And now we'll move this out a bit. Cool, that's something. Let's reduce the subdivisions so it looks a little more presentable. Cool, that's fine. Give it a little play. That looks awesome. And now let's duplicate it over. So script, you'll see that my duplicate mesh is here. Any tool that you use, you can hit Shift 1 so you can repeat that last thing you did. So I'm going to hit Shift 1, There, we got a duplicate. Okay. I'll go move, and yeah. Let's see. It looks close enough and stuck to these points. Cool. Give it a play. This is looking awesome. We could toss in some geo for the back wall here, but let's not worry about that for this. Okay, let's get the fridge and the countertop. Plane. Let's see, the fridge. I'll drag somewhere around here. Yeah, it looks a little funny in the camera view. Also, I could drag it down. You know what? I'm gonna undo. It looks a little funny in the camera view because the plane isn't created at the depth of the fridge, but that's fine. We'll do that later. So I'll drag this close to the floor, and now move. Bring it on back to the fridge. The fridge has a little curvature, so this isn't perfect. There is a way to sculpt this plane and move some vertices, but we're not gonna do that really in this video. I'm gonna reduce the divisions. Sometimes there's a lot of people who like to add a crazy absurd amount of divisions in their scenes so that it's hard to even see if the track is bad because there's so much polygons, so many edges and faces, it's hard to see past everything. So it's nice to keep things clean and looking very simple. Your supervisors or leads will thank you. Okay, the fridge is good, and let's get the counter. So one last plane. So here you see my red dot is the edge, and the other far edge of this is going to be this point on the edge of the counter. So from here I'm going to click, drag it to the wall and to the edge where that red dot is. Last but not least, classic divisions. Good. Oh, also that plane is on the floor now. Looks good here. It's on the floor. So we'll go move, drag it up. Oh, you can also see the kind of warp in my counter. Lovely. So I'm going to hold control so that this is more refined. Again, you don't have to be perfect. You could just drag this by hand. Doesn't matter. Okay, F2. This looks awesome. Again, you can see the crazy warp in my counter. It's pretty sad, I know. Oh, also, actually, sorry, my plane. I think my plane is a little... Is it off? No, it's on that corner. Again, yeah, it's just the dip in my counter. Yeah. I could rotate this a little bit, honestly. I can go rotate, and if I click and drag to rotate this, you'll notice it rotates from the center. But if I hit this lock, it will rotate from wherever I'm clicking. So I will click over here, rotate, hold control to refine it a bit. There we go. It's kind of sloped down, pointing at that red edge now. And you can see it lines up better at this angle. It was this. Now it is this. Okay, so things are looking pretty awesome, and we will call this done in terms of geometry. And you can build whatever you want in Maya, like maybe you want your character to interact with the edge of the sink or maybe the actual spout, so you would model all this out as you need. But again, you only build enough geo and Syntheyes just to check your scene. This honestly might even be a little overboard because you can get away with a box and see what your points are doing, and you could just do a couple tests with like one plane by dragging it around. But yeah, again, if you go far enough where you like the geo here and you think it'll help you with Maya, you can export it as well. Okay, now let's smooth the camera and then later apply the distortion. So like I said earlier that it's nice to smooth the camera before all this because these points are going to slightly change and shift position, and that's normal, but it will mean that I might have to slightly adjust some things. So smoothing this camera, honestly this camera is very smooth. I've tracked so many points. If I control A to select it all and look up here, I have 112 trackers. It may look like a lot of trackers. There are some people, I've heard some instructors even say, like, oh, don't track trackers this close together because it's not useful. No, this is important. You need clusters of points because they are going to help solve the distortion. If you're in like 3DE and you have to solve anamorphic, and if you don't know what anamorphic is, I'm not going to explain it here, but it's a much more advanced distortion. You need a lot of points to move across your screen so that when you solve, it's able to figure out every bit of warp in every portion of your shot. So you need a lot of trackers. What was I getting at with the trackers? I have a lot of them. What was I saying? I don't remember what I was saying. Anyway, I have a lot of trackers, and okay, we're smoothing the shot. So the shot's smooth, and it's smooth because I have so many trackers that that my camera doesn't even have the ability to move in a bad way, honestly. I have a lot of points in the background, the far background, the foreground, and the midground. That is also important. If you want to put something on a counter, don't just track the counter. Track everything. You need everything to be good. Everything you track in the background and the foreground also helps to stabilize your midground. And like everything helps each other. So don't be lazy and just track one area. Especially if you're working in production, everything needs to be good. Unless otherwise, maybe you've talked to a supervisor and you know a faster way, but you know that maybe they can get away with something less, but that doesn't happen very often. Just make everything good. Otherwise, you're going to embarrass yourself and not have a good time. Let's see. Okay, let's just smooth this. Let's get this going. I just have to explain that this track is very smooth because of all the points, so really smoothing the shot isn't going to do much. So this is going to be kind of complicated. I don't know how detailed I'm going to get with this because this is honestly worth a separate video. But so let's start smoothing. So under the solver tab, we're going to switch over to refine mode. Refine mode, I should actually explain really quickly what this is. Refine mode, when you're in automatic, this is like solving from scratch, which we did. And solving from scratch means that the solver needs an initial solution, and then it goes and like those two frames, these two starting frames, the green and the red, you could see Syntheyes found those automatically. And basically picture these as your left and right eye. You can see the parallax between these two frames, and Syntheyes will calculate that using photogrammetry. And then it'll go and kind of solve the rest of the shot based off of your initial solve. And every frame in your shot these points, they all refine themselves and keep repositioning until you get the solve that you get. So if you have any jittery or slidey points, they're generally going to hurt the surrounding points and introduce some error into your shot. So you might get sliding or jitter. Not a good time. But yeah, so automatic, it solves from scratch, it gives you two frames, and then just kind of solves everything. And that's what every software does if it's solving a camera. But refine skips that beginning process. It skips these two frames. You can kind of see we can't even adjust the frames ourselves now. It takes your existing solve and it works off of it and just continues to make it better. Because let's say if you solve from scratch, sometimes you might get a bad solve. You might ruin something good that you had, and yeah, it's not a good time. So in refine mode, okay, so now we're smoothing. We're actually doing it now. So we're in refine mode. We're going to turn constrain on because we're going to turn on these axes locks, and we need constrain on to actually listen to any locks in the scene. So now that we're in refine, constrain is on, we'll go into filtering control, and let's get a nice little view of the camera path. So here, this camera's so smooth, I'm not going to smooth it too much, so I'm going to turn strength down by half to 0.5 and just give it a little minor smooth. See, it barely moved. We didn't need too much out of this one. Something I cannot stress enough, hit reset. I think I already said this, but I'm going to say it again. Hit reset. If you leave this on, it's going to smooth this. It's going to continue to smooth after every solve that you did. And that might sound nice and convenient, but here's the problem with that. You'll notice, actually I'm going to undo my smooth. you'll notice when I hit apply, the error here changes. You can see these ripples here jumped around. And easier way to see something too is if I right click, turn on our tracker radars. I actually should have used these earlier. These are a great way to show what points you have that are bad in sliding. Actually, let's full screen this. F2. So when I play these radars, these little red circles, they expand to show you how far the 3D point is sliding apart from your tracker. So let's say the worst one over here, this is an intentionally bad point. So it's tough tracking curved things because it's not a real solid point you're solving. So you could see my tracker is sliding and the 3D point is it's sliding separately from the tracker. But because the rest of the solve has so many points and the solve turned out so good, if I hit, instead of hitting 5 to lock the tracker, if I hit shift 5, I lock onto the 3D point itself. And when we look at the 3D point, you could see it's actually locked onto the speaker more than my tracker is. It did a better job figuring it out than I did. But again, you typically want to track all the best features you can and do as good a job as you can. So that's radars. Radars is showing you the distance that these points slide away from their tracker, and that's how it shows you how bad some of your points actually are. So I turned on these radars because I wanted to show you why smoothing why smoothing all the time is bad. Because when you smooth, the actual point of going into locks is we're going to lock the smooth path, just the path, so that we're going to resolve just for the rotations. Because when we smooth, we damage the rotations. So when I hit smooth, let's zoom in here, watch some of the points, and look at my camera path. Let's just crank this up to 1, actually. Okay, so I'm gonna do there's a key on here. Where is that keyed? Let's right click that, get rid of that. Be careful with stuff in Syntheyes. Again, try to do everything on the first frame because things are animatable. So I'm gonna right click, there we go. Okay, we got 1 smooth for everything. So now when I smooth, we're gonna see the error for all these trackers increases, and you might see some of these points move. So filter, and you could see the scene has all moved slightly. Here we could see everything's moving. That's because our camera here has jumped a little bit side to side. But now we need to resolve with our smooth path, but only solve the rotation now. So reset this filter. Again, always reset this. You don't want it to be resmoothing every time you solve. So first frame, so we're in refine mode. We've turned on constrain. We smooth the path. And now in axes lock, this is kind of confusing, but here it is as simply as I could possibly put this. So we turn on the lock. The order this doesn't matter, honestly. So this get button, it's going to get that smooth path that we just made, load it into here, and lock to it, so that we lock with that smooth path. So hit get. Now these values, this is that smooth path right here. And you can even animate the strength of how much you want to stick to the smooth path. Because maybe you want a smooth path, but you want a little bit of jitter from the natural solve. So you can say like, hey, 50% or something. So yeah, position is locked. Again, I'll do this stuff in the first frame because this is also animatable. And yeah, so now we can hit go. So we have our fine, constraint is on, and we smooth the path, and we've imported that smooth path and locked it. I sound like a broken record. I know, I'm repeating everything. So here, now if I undo and redo, you can see the old solve, there's the points, and the new solve, everything adjusted and shifted over. That's normal. And that's also why I said it's nice to refine everything before you start building out Geo, because things are going to be slightly different. You can see the fridges. Change position, counter a little bit off now. But yeah, this is all stuff that you can fix later on in your other software. Things still look okay. Shh, be quiet, computer. I don't know if you heard the noise it made. Okay, so this is done. So we've solved the camera. We've oriented using perspective lines. We have solve the distortion, and we've built out Geo for some of the essential services. So the only thing that's really left is to apply the distortion and export. So applying distortion, you have this lens workflow button. You could find it under lens, and you can also find it under summary, but let's stick to solver. So lens workflow, with redistorted 2 on, if I hit OK, now your plate has changed. It has increased resolution, so you could export this plate if you want to use it. And to do so, you would go to summary, save sequence, and then you can write it out wherever you need to. And then you can use this plate in Maya, and you can also write this out as a very high-res EXR. And if you know what this is, you can write out ST maps. Oh, where is it? No, it was there. Write distortion maps. This will give you ST maps that you can use in most software to apply the distortion back with your CG and your footage. You can also run your CG, your rendered CG, back through Syntheyes and apply the distortion to it by going up to like shot, change shot images, redistort CGI, hit OK, and then select, and then you're going to load in the CG. And when it's loaded in, it's going to appear in here with the distortion applied back on, and then you can write it out again. And then that's your final CG with the distortion applied. That probably didn't make much sense. There is a tutorial floating around in it on Syntheyes HQ's YouTube channel. Maybe I'll do one in the future myself. I don't know. But so so now that we've applied the distortion, this is the camera you would export. So you can go File and Export and pick whatever you want. You've got Blender, you've got Nuke, you've got Maya ASCII Scene, which is what I typically use. Filmbox FBX. If you're advanced to the point where you've done deforming meshes in Syntheyes, Filmbox will give you deforming meshes and everything in your scene. I think that might be it. I think that's everything covered. So let's just take a look. F3. So I'm in here. I can hit lock. So yeah, this is done. Just in case you're wondering, some points, like if I lock onto here, oh, F2, hit 5 to lock. Some points, like if I look here, at this point, it's sliding around and it's not very great. And I have a few of those going on here. Like, you can see the error up here, it's sliding around, it's not perfect. If you're working in the industry, typically you don't get footage like this. I shot this myself on a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K. I'm dealing with rolling shutter, and I'm holding this handheld. So I'm dealing with rolling shutter here, and solving for rolling shutter isn't super fun and also not very common nowadays. So yeah, just to address why some of the errors are popping around in the scene. Alright, well, I think that's it. I don't think I missed anything. Hopefully I didn't, and hopefully you enjoyed this very sloppily put together tutorial. And enjoy your day or night wherever you are, and yeah, happy tracking.